The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this HOW Interactive Design Conference Makeup session. My name is Laura Yu, Content Development Manager with HOW and Prince. In a couple of minutes, Emmy Award-winning interactive strategist and founding principal of Blue Cadet Interactive, Josh Goldblum, will present his session, Wireframing for Fun and for Profit. But before we get started, I want to mention a couple of housekeeping items. All callers are on mute today to avoid distractions, so if you have any technical difficulties, there's a questions box on the right-hand side of your screen, and you can submit any issues there. And then if we have time at the end of Josh's presentation, we'll do a little Q&A. So if you have anything that you'd like me to ask Josh, then you can submit your questions there as well. And then also I just want to remind everybody that the session is being recorded, and you'll get an email in the next day or so that will contain links to the recording. So with that, I will hand it over to Josh.
Hello, this is Josh Goldblum. Good to have you all. So this is Wireframing for Fun and Profit. So quickly, Blue Cadet. This is our website. This is Blue Cadet. Who are we? We are an award-winning interactive design studio. We are in Philadelphia, which was trapped by the hurricane last week, so I missed you guys. Sorry about that. There are actually 18 of us now, and we specialize in interactive design and strategy. We work mostly with museums and cultural institutions, nonprofit organizations, but we do some corporate stuff as well. We win a lot of awards, which is wonderful because it gets us more work. And again, these are sort of our services. We do everything from strategy to design to development. We also do things beyond just web. We do a lot of mobile, touchscreen, in-gallery work, a range of types of projects. And there's some more clients. So anyway, I'm going to show you real quickly to sort of pass through some work before we get into the guts of this, just to familiarize you guys with what we do. So this is the National Constitution Center. So this was a large institutional website redesign, one that we spent a lot of time basically discovery, doing lots of iterations of wireframes, lots of stakeholder meetings. This was probably a year-long project. This is sort of going down the page. This is live now, so you can check it out. Lots of nice little jQuery fun things when you click on the more. That's slides down, changes color, lots of integration of social. So these are the types of projects that we're doing. This one also has a large content strategy behind it. This was the Philadelphia Orchestra, and again, an institutional site. This was the Diego Rivera microsite for the MoMA that we put out last year, more of like kind of a flash-like experiential site. This was actually delivered in Spanish and English. We also did a mobile site for this. This is one where we had this is sort of an interactive Google map. This is a cool little thing where you can kind of see the underpainting of the painting, slide it around. Here, so you can see on the upper left-hand corner, that's the web version. It was an HTML5 mobile site, and then we also do some iPhone and iPad work as well. So I just wanted to give you a sense of kind of the breadth of the things that we do, and I'm going to show you some wireframing that takes on sort of a more traditional, for some of the more traditional institutional sites, but also for things that are a little bit more experiential, which would constitute, the iPads and the in-gallery work. This is Starve Retention. This is a project we did with the Doctors Without Borders and Seven Photo Agency. We localized this one to 9 languages, which was all very fun and impressive. Too Young to Wed is a recent sort of long scroll parallax site we did with the UNFPA. And again, with 7 Photo Agency, this was sort of had a strong call to action. This was all about childhood marriage, which is shockingly more prevalent than you would think. We do a lot of in-gallery work. So these are these large multi-touch screens. This is for the Field Museum in Chicago. I'm actually going to show you guys a more recent project that we did with them, which was a interactive T-Rex. I'm going to show you kind of the guts and the process of how those things come about. Because basically this project also involves a lot of wireframing. It actually uses a very similar process that you would use for designing a website or an app. And actually in some ways it has a lot of similarities to developing an app. This is, there's me and my family, and this is the My 2012 show. There's a multi-touch table that we designed for that. You can see kind of a better view of it. Again, this is designing for multiple users. We're using, I'm going to show you kind of the process that we bring to producing these types of projects. And this was one where we did for Financial Times, which was a 70-foot square projection that was projected in Grand Central Station, controlled by a 15-foot square touch mat. So, ahead of just talking about wireframes, I wanted to kind of talk about why we have a process in general. Just to give you some background, Blue Cadet basically started as my freelance handle back in the day when I did everything. I worked in-house at the Smithsonian for a number of years, then I went out as a freelancer, and I kind of did, I never really worked in a traditional agency, so I had to kind of invent my own process. And I can say when I started out, I didn't really have a process, and I got in a lot of trouble. I lost a lot of money. There was a lot of there's a lot of weirdness that happens when you don't have a process. And our lives are much easier now that we have a really good process. But so one of the reasons the process is, basically trying to make sure you don't get this kind of design feedback. So like, oh, we're really disappointed. We're hoping for more. This isn't what we talked about. What were you thinking? So these are the kind of feedback you can expect when you jump too quickly into design. When you think that you have this brilliant idea and that you have it all figured out and you know what the client wants, from some sort of intuitive sense, or you're just so confident in your own abilities that you dive into producing something before you've really gone through the due diligence and the hard work of really triangulating the client's expectations. So our process. So it combines a little bit of the artistic, with a lot of the structural. So, we consider ourselves much more in the, this is, I think, Corbusier, I might be pronouncing it wrong. We consider ourselves much more in that camp. What we do is very artistic, and we have a lot of really talented designers here, and we really care about the aesthetics. But the underlying structure of the experience is in some ways way more important. And, the gloss and the interactivity that we had on top of that structure, it makes a big difference. But without having really thought about the structure, without having gone through that process, our sets would be really unsuccessful. All our projects would be unsuccessful. So this is just a quick sort of snapshot of our process. This is pretty traditional. You have discovery, asking lots of questions, information architecture, where wireframing falls in, which we'll go into, design and visual interface, development, testing, delivery. So this is sort of what's called the waterfall. And it's never quite this linear, but this is basically how it's structured. The idea is also that at any of these steps, we're getting client feedback and sign-off, so that before we go from information architecture and design, we've really gotten hard sign-offs on the wireframes. We've gotten hard sign-offs on the mood boards. And if they want to roll back, our client is going to end up basically extending the scope, and they're aware of that. So this keeps things kind of on budget, on price, and on schedule, which actually makes everyone much happier. So I'm going to give you a sort of an institutional example for kind of a wireframes 101. So this is the Wistar site redesign. This is a site that we did a few years ago for the Wistar Institute. Okay, so this is not one of our projects. I hope you guys can tell that. This was the site that we inherited. So it was really ugly, really disorganized. It looked really small. And it was not a really great point of departure for the redesign of the site, because in fact the Wistar Institute, they cured measles, mumps, rubella. They've been around. I think they're one of the oldest science institutes in the country. They've been around forever, but you can't really tell any of that from their site. So we had to do a really deep discovery process, figuring out where the content for the site should actually reside and how it should be organized. So we really couldn't use the site as a starting point at all. So this is the wireframe that we produced for the homepage. I'll give you a zoomed-in view. So you can see, this is basically, this was after a lot of questionnaires, a lot of meetings, talking with them a lot. We basically figured out who the major users of the site were. We developed some user personas, basically typical users to the site, and kind of figured out what kind of content they would be seeking. And we created a structure around that. So, basically what wireframes are really good at is establishing the navigational structure of the site and the structural vocabulary. Our wireframes tend to be a little bit more high fidelity than others. We've had ones before where they're really non-detailed, but then the clients, kind of ball. So this is, through a lot of back and forth iteration, we've basically arrived at this sort of this sort of approach. These are all done in Photoshop, which we find makes it really easy to kind of go from wireframes into design. But here you can see like where we've established some different layers of navigation, talked about how the page is going to be laid out. We also, this is a subpage. For wireframes, we'll usually, depending on the complexity of the site, wireframe anywhere from 3 to 7 views in the first iteration, and then we'll usually iterate through about 3 rounds until we really feel like we've established the sort of structural vocabulary. Just quickly, we'll show you mood boards. This should be really typical to you guys. This should be familiar. But basically, what mood boards are ways of figuring out what the look of it should be. So we also will be sending our clients lots of examples of designs, of treatments. This right here, our client had a project where they wanted to have a sense of flow, and I don't know what that means. So we sent some different examples and say, okay, is this flow, is this flow, is this flow? And by getting feedback on these things, we figured out, okay, what are the design implications? What are the design expectations from the client? And then what we do is we iterate the mood boards, we iterate the wireframes, and then we mash it up. So you give them some samples type. That's also the mood board. So basically what happens is we iterate the wireframes and we iterate the mood boards. And then once we get sign off, the client says, okay, yeah, you got it. We feel comfortable with the structure, this works. We feel comfortable with the design direction, then we kind of mash them up. So this was our first take of the Wistar site. So you can see that this is consistent with the wireframes and the feedback we got on the mood boards. But they didn't like it. It was too dark. So we went through an iteration. This and there's like, oh, well, this is nicer. This is more in keeping with our style. But it's still, this area up here, the hero image is sort of floating. We'll refine it some more. So ultimately, we ended up with something like this. This is pretty close to what the current Wistar site looks like. But again, you can see that this has the same sort of structural vocabulary as the wireframes. And the same, same basic look, but we've iterated and we've closer triangulated what the client's expectations were for the design. They're really happy with it. And then what happens then is we basically extrapolate that over the rest of the site. And these will also go through some revisions. Okay, so wireframes 201. So that was a kind of a pretty traditional website redesign. I mean, there's some complexities, but there's nothing really quite new there. So this is a project we did called With Art for the Greater Philadelphia Tourism Marketing Corporation. So the goals were basically to draw tourists to Philadelphia to take art tours. So this was actually coinciding with the opening of the Barnes Foundation. So there was 2 major things that we were doing. One was to create this site where they could create their own art tours, and then also the second part was this interactive map. So the following are some wireframes basically showing how the art tours would work. So you can see we've sort of wireframed out the experience. The style of this one to the last one, these are actually 2 different designers that are working on it. All of our designers have a slightly different kind of take on wireframes. So there's a little bit of difference between them. But here you can see this is a grid view where users of the site will be able to select different artwork. They'll be able to view in the grid, a slideshow, a map, and there's a utility share view. But they'll be able to view the artwork here. They'll be able to click on it. This was showing a Google Map view. This is in the map view right there. And then this is kind of what it ended up looking like in the end. So this is the grid view. Oh, I'm sorry. Actually, that's the home page. Apologize. This is the grid view, and you can see more so than the Wistar site. Even though the navigation is really similar from the wireframes to the design, there's a lot of more departure in terms of the look. So where this was just text in the wireframes, we've added iconography, we've styled these things, we broke out the share button into these actual shared little mini buttons, which are the right side of the list view. And then here's the map view. We ended up using the black and white Google Map view, and then we added a lot more style and detail. But what happened was we were able to go through a couple iterations of the wireframes and really got a sense of, okay, is this functioning? Making some revisions, getting them really kind of committed to the look and the approach, or not the look, but to the structural approach before we went into design. So the next part was they wanted this interactive map. that basically positions the Parkway in Philadelphia as this major art destination. So we actually ended up looking at using Google Earth. We ended up looking at doing actually illustrated versions of this. Ultimately, what we found was the thing that would actually require the least amount of effort and give the most impact was actually modeling this in a 3D program. So this right here is actually a working document that we modeled this out really roughly in 3D Studio Max. And while this isn't a wireframe, you can kind of see that this deliverable serves that function, because really what we're doing is we're figuring out the structure here. You know, we use Google Earth as a way to kind of set up our views and determine some of these things. So we were basically switching between this right here, which is this overhead view, and laying out these different points of the tour. So these different dots along the parkway are basically different stops along these art tours. They're different destinations. And then this here is basically helping us position the camera. Oops, sorry, that's, oh no, wait, hold on a second. All right, so this is actually, we want to get to the, all right, so this is it in action. So you click on this. I hope this isn't too jumpy for you. But you can see that basically going through those different steps, creating the overhead kind of view and creating those stops, and then using Google Earth to triangulate where the camera stops would be, it allowed us to produce this. This was actually all done with JavaScript, so this actually works really beautifully on the tablet. So again, this type of experience, something that is as detailed as a map, you're not going to be able to, you're not going to really get the client to figure that out just through sort of straight wireframing, or if you do that, it's going to be a lot of work, because you're really going to end up spending so much time creating detailed wireframes that is actually, it would have been just easier to model it. The next thing I want to show you guys is animatics. So this is a place where, where wireframes just don't cut it anymore. So there's certain designs that just don't really translate that well into the finished product, particularly when the final product needs to be sort of more experiential and engaging. The animation, the flow, the pacing, all of those things are just much more important than some of the structural considerations, or just the design stills themselves just don't convey very much. So let me take you through the example here, and hopefully you guys can see what I'm talking about. So this was a project for the Bronx Documentary Center for a documentary, an online documentary about Tim Hetherington, who was a photographer that was killed in Libya almost 2 years ago. So this project isn't live yet. We're actually still sort of working on it, soliciting some final funding for it. But basically, what we were trying to do is we're trying to create a linear narrative that allowed you to basically follow Tim's path during the final days in Misrata, Libya. And we wanted to have something that sort of reflected risk-taking and courage, and it gave a really sort of emotional feel. So you can see this is one where wireframes didn't even necessarily make sense, because the design approach was going to be so simple. So this is actually a still of the design, and as you can see, it doesn't really convey much. There's nothing here that really would sell the client or allow them to understand whether this would be successful or not. I mean, I could walk you through this and say, okay, well, this little ship icon here, you're going to drag this, and as you drag over these different bars, different images are going to cycle through. But again, there would be some disconnect. There's a lot to explain, and for this reason, we had to go a bit further and develop animatics, which are really After Effects animations. So again, this is another view. It's a still. It can allow you to better understand what's going on. But again, this still doesn't convey a particular. It doesn't convey what it means to the client. So this is the animatic. This was actually developed in After Effects. So I'll just let you guys watch this for a second. So, as you can see, there's a lot that's conveyed in this animation that would have been really impossible to convey through animation or stills. So I would encourage you that if you guys have a project where the animations and the transitions and the pacing and the feel are as principally and as important as the structure, that you consider using an animation program to basically illustrate how this will work. By doing this and not going into just building it, really allows the client to get their head around what they're going to be ultimately signing off on and paying for, and it'll end up saving you a lot of time and aggravation in the long run. I think that this type of project would have been impossible to sell to the client if we didn't create something like this. Okay, the last project I'm going to show you guys is a project that required a lot of wireframing, but also a lot of prototyping. So this was for the Field Museum. This is called Sue the T-Rex. So this was a 60. Let me see about the. Oh. So what it is a 63-inch multi-touch T-Rex puzzle. So Sue is actually the largest and most complete T-Rex skeleton in the world, and the Field Museum is very very proud of this. They had actually scanned the entire skeleton in a 3D scanner, and they had basically a 3D model of the skeleton. They wanted to take that skeleton and turn it into some sort of game or puzzle. Basically allow people to dig around and recreate the skeleton for themselves, or really kind of explore the different components of the skeleton and learn more about Sue. And they wanted it to be really fun. They wanted to have about a 7-minute dwell time. They wanted, they wanted it to be multi-user, which was kind of tricky. So this is actually a still of the final design. The thing is, designing for something like this, and you'll see when I go through the process, we spent a lot of time doing wireframes and figuring out basically how the experience would basically map out. But until we actually had a prototype and we had people actually playing with it, it was really hard to predict how people would use it or what they would think is fun. There were just a lot of variables that you could only really address once the project was kind of at least in sort of a beta state. So what we ended up doing was kind of an agile development approach, and I'll kind of illustrate that for you. So here's some wireframes. So you can see initially they wanted it to be at least 3 users. So initially we thought the idea of having these 3 different areas would make a lot of sense. So you'd touch one of these areas to begin, and then you'd have your little station. So from this station, you would be able to then go and pick a different area of the skeleton, and then pick a bone and place a bone, and everything was going to happen within this space. And then the skeleton up here in the center, you'd be able to spin around. But really, what you'd be doing is placing the bones more locally, and it would aggregate onto the skeleton. And that was kind of how we thought this would be the best way to address this problem. This is showing a detailed view of the bones, and I think what you'll see is what we ended up with borrows from some of these ideas, but definitely there's a lot of derivation from there. We definitely moved pretty far away from this model. So. Mute that for you because you don't need to hear the sound. But one of the first things we had to figure out was whether we'd actually be able to spin the skeleton in 3D smoothly. The other thing we were trying to figure out is how much should we allow, how much control should we allow. So one of the things you can see here is you can spin it and place it at any any angle. So you would be able to spin this so that Sue's completely underside. The problem here was that it was actually really annoying. You would get her in these angles, and that it was really hard to see what was going on. The good news was that we found that the hardware was fantastic, and that we could get this really, really fluid spin cycle. The bad news was that it just felt really weird, and you had just too much control. So this is a later iteration. So you can see now we're spinning it. But you'll see when you tilt it now and you let go, it spins back to its axis. So adding that and adding some easing and smoothing really made this much more enjoyable. You can also see that instead of creating sort of 3 different areas, we created a unified bone drawer. And this was something that we figured out through a lot of testing and iteration. So even if we had gotten complete sign-off from the client on the wireframes and just design and develop this thing, it just wouldn't have been very good because really we needed to observe how people were using this and really test there. So you can see this is very much a testing version. All the details haven't been totally worked in at this point. And if you look at, you can see when she's reaching, you can see these different little points there. That's actually, those aren't in the final. That's just sort of testing to show that, registering all those touch points. Keep moving it. So this is the final Sue project. So you can see that now once we had gotten the overall sort of look and we'd gotten the functionality down through all that testing, then we went in and we added a lot of detail. So this has a lot more refinement than the view you saw before. We implemented easing on all of these big 3D models. We created all the custom iconography. We actually switched the iconography quite a bit. Like for example, we needed an icon for the 3D view in that little circular pop-up. We went through a whole bunch of different versions. We went through a lot of user testing. You can see also what they just did there right there was pull a bone directly from the bottom area to the skeleton. We saw a lot of users trying to do that, so we implemented that functionality. That was the sort of thing where we would have never known to do that if we didn't actually observe a lot of users with us. So anyway, I'm going to skip ahead real quickly so you can kind of see. One thing that was kind of cool was once you complete the skeleton, we have a little Easter egg there. I can hear the dog squeaking in the background for that one. So anyway, I wanted to show you a couple different approaches. I mean, they all deal with wireframing and the concept of wireframing. I also want to leave you guys with some other suggestions. One, this is an illustration here of the process of building Sue. This last part is showing bug checking. We do a ton of QA and testing on our projects. This is one of those areas that's really easy to skip over and gloss over and just try to launch the thing as quickly as possible without doing a lot of testing and without making sure that everything is working. We usually put about 2 weeks into at least into just quality assurance and final user testing before we push the site live. Then also when we do push the site live, a lot of times we'll do a soft launch. So I'd say for your projects, that's definitely something you should try to integrate into your production schedules. The other thing that we do that I'm sure many of you do is we use Basecamp. I tend to prefer the old Basecamp, but anyway, the idea is Basecamp is a project management software put out by 37 Signals. There's a lot of different project management softwares out there. We prefer this one. We use Harvest for time checking. It's really, really good to keep things really structured with your projects. Keep milestones, keep time, have a real rigid delivery schedule. If your clients, basically break the schedule, republish the schedule. Don't use that as an excuse to just go off the ranch. That'll save you a lot of time, money, and aggravation. Another thing is this is an illustration of the Lean Startup methodology. There's a book by Eric Ries called The Lean Startup. I'd suggest any of you guys pick it up. This is actually fairly close to the process that we used for Sue, but it's a really useful process once you have a product to iterate and refine it. So the idea is that once a project's out in the wild, website launches, you're going to get users who are going to start banging on it. You're going to start getting a lot of really useful feedback. You shouldn't consider a project done when it launches. You should really allow the project to. You should allow for some time to really go back in there, refine it. See how people are using the site, tweak it, see if that improves the user experience, and just basically keep iterating. This is how all the big websites function. You're never going to see Facebook 3.0. They're just going to steadily integrate new features and functionality, roll them out, test them, and this is definitely something that can be integrated into most projects. Also, I would say it's really useful to have a really great frame of reference for who's doing the best work. Back when we were doing a lot more Flash projects, we went to thefwa.com. We still go to thefwa.com pretty regularly. For more standards, standards-based projects, web projects, the awards are a fantastic site. Basically, it's really important to keep up with what the latest trends are. What constitutes really good design and interaction. And don't be afraid of being a little bit derivative, as long as you know why you're being derivative, and and if you're being derivative for a purpose, if it serves the content really well. Usually, what we find is even if you start a project a little bit derivative or inspired by another project, after it goes through enough internal review and revision, it ends up somewhere completely not derivative. So that's it for me. So I'm happy to take any questions that you guys might have.
Yeah, thanks, Josh. That was awesome.
Okay, good.
We don't have any questions lined up just yet, but I'll give everybody just a minute to submit any if you have any, and go ahead and tell you about the next makeup session, which will take place on Friday, November 9th with Laura Franz. She'll be presenting her session, Finding, Testing, and Using Web Fonts. And if you'd like to register but haven't, you can find the registration link in the email you received yesterday, and it's also posted in our How Interactive Design Conference West Facebook group. And then for those of you who are interested in Brian Miller's session, Principles of Information Architecture, a Guide to Thinking Like an Information Architect, we're going to be coordinating a makeup session with him in the near future, so just keep an eye out for that information. But in the meantime, if you're interested in a really in-depth look at how to become an information architect, we're offering a 40% discount for his independent study, How Design University Independent Study on Principles of Information Architecture. And you can access that at mydesignshop.com and get your 40% discount with the code Miller40. All of this information will be delivered via email as well, in case you didn't catch any of that detail. Let me see what we got here. Good web resources for. So are you aware of any good resources for wireframing? Like you showed some examples. Are there any kind of sites or online resources that offer kind of some good templates for wireframing, understanding that all web projects will be a little bit different?
Good question. I would say that I don't really know of any great sites for that. We're actually relaunching our site in a few months, well, hopefully a few weeks to a few months, and we're going to be putting a lot of our wireframing process up there. Actually, our site, we actually do have a lot of our wireframes in the project views, so they can find them there. There are also a bunch of other agencies that do provide some of their process. Off the top of my head, Jess3, which is JESS3.com. He puts a lot of his wireframes up on his site. Wonderfactory.com, they also put some of their wireframes up on their site. There's no real kind of definitive repository for these, as far as I can tell. But generally they'll crop up here and there on blogs. Secondstory.com. They also have a couple blog posts where they show some of their wireframes in process. A lot of times these things kind of just crop up in blogs, studio blogs, and sometimes in the portfolio sections. But yeah, maybe that's a need in this industry.
And then you had mentioned sites like the awards are good for inspiration, but you mentioned another one that you used to go to that you still think is good. What was that site again?
Yeah, it's still fantastic. It's the FWA. So it's basically favoritewebsiteawards.com, and that has a lot of really beautiful. It used to be almost entirely Flash microsites from like big international agencies, but they've actually been showing a lot of really interesting HTML5 projects on there. That's a really great resource.
Great. And then your site, somebody was asking, your website is bluecadet.com. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
And I should also mention, if anybody has any questions, you can feel free to email me at josh@bluecadet.com.
Great.
And my Twitter handle is just @Josh Goldblum if you want to direct message me or whatever.
And then we also had a listener asking about your slides, and we will make Josh's slides available for anybody who wants to kind of go back through and take a closer look at any of the projects that he presented. So I guess that is it from us. Thanks, Josh, for joining us and for the makeup session. We appreciate your time.
Oh, my pleasure.
All right, thanks everyone. Have a good day.